Hi, I'm back with you right now to read Chapter 1, The Masked Empire. The air was filled with so much smoke you could barely see the sky. Every time it was cleared by a strong wind, it was quickly replenished from another pillaged town or forest fire. During the day, the sun looked like a weak lantern shining through a brown sheet. At night, seeing a star had become as rare as spotting a shooting star. The Fairytale World had faced many troubling times in recent years, but never anything like this. It was the first time in history that happily ever after seemed impossible to regain. Over the course of one night, the Wicked Witch of the West's Winky army attacked the Charming Kingdom and the Troblin territory. Her flying monkeys were sent to terrorize the Elf Empire and the Corner Kingdom. The Queen of Hearts marched her card soldiers through the Center Kingdom and then wreaked havoc on the Eastern Kingdom. Captain Hook's band of pirates poisoned the waters of Mermaid Bay, sending the mermaids fleeing deeper into the ocean. Captain Hook's flying ship, the Jolly Roger, attacked the Fairy Kingdom, leaving the palace in pieces. Then the captain took the Northern Kingdom by storm. The soldiers and villagers of every kingdom who had once banded together to fight off the Grand Army were no match for these invaders. Their homes and towns were pillaged and burned to the ground. Their farms and stables were raided, and their livestock and horses were stolen. All the fairies were presumed dead or in hiding. The kings and queens had lost their thrones, and their homes lay in ruins. The forests were slowly burned one at a time, giving the animals and refugees fewer and fewer places to hide. The kingdoms and territories of yesterday ceased to exist. All the land in the fairytale world had been combined into one large empire ruled by the infamous Masked Man and his newly assembled literary army. The elf, troll, goblin, and human civilians from all over Fairytale World were rounded up and marched into the Northern Kingdom. They were pushed into Swan Lake, just beside the severely damaged Northern Palace. The lake had been dried out by the literary army, making it a deep, muddy crater, perfect for holding civilian prisoners. By the time the lake was filled, the sun had started its descent in the western sky. The literary soldiers pointed their captives' attention to a large balcony of the palace. Doors opened and the masked man appeared. His entire head was covered in a mask made of rubies and jewels with only 2 slits for his eyes. His raggedy clothes had been upgraded to a well-tailored suit. He wore a long black cape with a collar that towered sinisterly over his head. The masked man finally looked like the menacing ruler he had always wanted to become. His entrance was met with a thunderous rumble of booing and hissing, which only escalated when the Queen of Hearts, the Wicked Witch of the West, and Captain Hook joined him on the balcony. The masked man held his hands out in front of him, embracing the noise as if it were applause. Now, he said, is this how you address your new emperor? The title was not received well by his imprisoned audience. Many of the civilians had stashed food in their clothing before being forced from their homes, and rather than saving it, they threw it angrily at the masked man. The self-appointed emperor was pelted with tomatoes, plums, and heads of lettuce. The civilians roared with laughter. Even the Wicked Witch of the West cackled at the embarrassing scene. But the masked man wouldn't let his first moments as emperor become a mockery. "Silence or I'll kill all of you," the masked man yelled. The food throwing stopped, and a tense hush fell over the dried-up lake. He had already destroyed their villages and homes. There was no telling how far he'd go to gain respect. A winged monkey brought the masked man a rag, and he wiped the food off his clothing. "From this day forward, you will no longer be the people of your pathetic kingdoms, but the property of this empire. Disrespect me again, and I will not show you the same mercy as your weak kings and fragile queens. Anyone who dares to cross me will not only lose their own lives, but will first watch as I take their families' lives as well." The children throughout the lake began to cry, and their parents held them tightly. It seemed the darkest days were still ahead. "I've brought you all here to witness the birth of a new era," the masked man preached. "But before we achieve the new future, the ways of the past must be destroyed, and the leaders of the past are no exception." The masked man gestured to a large wooden platform below the balcony on the lawn placed between the palace and the dried lake. A very tall man in a long black cloak climbed to the top of the platform and placed a large wooden block in the center. A dozen flying monkeys pulled a wagon out from behind the palace. It carried all the former kings and queens of the fairytale world: Cinderella, King Chance, Sleeping Beauty, King Chase, Snow White, King Chandler, Trobella, Empress Elvina, Rapunzel, Sir William, and even the young princesses Hope and Ash. All the royals had their hands tied together and were blindfolded and gagged with strips of white cloth. The tall man on the platform withdrew a large silver axe from inside his cloak. The civilians began screaming and shouting in horror once they realized the purpose of it. The masked man was going to have the royal families executed. Although they couldn't see, the kings and queens knew what was happening by the sounds of the terrified crowd. They fought against their restraints, but they didn't budge. The civilians desperately tried to climb out of the dried lake to save their rulers, but they were kicked back into the mud. The card soldiers stood around the lake's perimeter and locked arms, forming a wall to block them. The masked man laughed wildly at all the terror he was causing. The Winky soldiers pulled the royals out of the wagon and pushed them up the steps to the platform. They stood guard around it. The cloaked executioner sharpened his axe as he waited for his cue to begin. "Start with the men, then the women, then the children," the masked man ordered. "Your Majesty, if you would please do the honors." The Queen of Hearts stepped to the edge of the balcony. With enlarged eyes and a devious grin, she looked down at the distressed royals like they were a delicious snack. "Off with their heads!" she roared. The lake erupted in protest. The women cried desperate pleas for the execution to stop, and the men yelled profanities at the masked man for being so cruel. The frightened royal families huddled together in a corner on the platform and trembled. The executioner selected King Chance to be his first kill. He grabbed him by the arm and dragged him to the block. Cinderella and Hope screamed through their gags when they realized he was no longer standing beside them. The executioner forced Chance into a kneeling position and placed his head on the wooden block. He held the axe above the king's neck and practiced swinging. With each swing, the civilians gasped, fearing it would be the fatal blow. Finally, the executioner raised his axe higher into the air than he had raised it before. The pleas and screams from the helpless bystanders multiplied, and the royals knew that it was only a matter of seconds before the king lost his head. The executioner brought the axe down, but as he did, he spun his body so it sliced the platform floor instead of the king's neck. Suddenly, the floor caved in, causing the executioner and all the royals to fall through the platform and disappear from sight. It was so unexpected, the panicked crowd went silent. This couldn't have been part of the plan. "What just happened?" the masked man screamed from the balcony. "Get them out of there!" Just as the Winky soldiers went to inspect the platform, 3 large horses burst out from inside of it. Porridge, Buckle, and Oats had been under the platform the entire time. They were pulling a carriage with the executioner and all the royals safely aboard. The platform had been a large trapdoor. "No!" the masked man screamed and leaned over the balcony as far as he could to get a better look. To his horror, he saw Goldilocks on Porridge and Jack on Buckle. The couple steered the horses and the carriages into the forest beyond the palace, knocking over dozens of Winky soldiers as they went. The execution had turned into a rescue mission right before the masked man's eyes. Goldilocks glanced back at the rescued royals. "Is everyone all right?" The royals moaned through their gags. Still blindfolded, they had no clue what was going on. The executioner threw up his cloak. It had been the Tin Woodman all along. "Don't fret, your majesties," he said. "This is a rescue." The Tin Woodman sliced off the royals' restraints with his axe. "We're not out of it yet," Jack said. "Everyone stay low. This is going to be a bumpy ride." Meanwhile, the elf, troll, goblin, and human civilians embraced one another and cheered as their leaders got away. The masked man was so furious he practically was breathing fire. The visible skin around his eyes turned so red it matched the rubies on his mask. "After them, all of you," he ordered to the literary army. "Don't let them escape." The rescue party was chased through the forest by droves of Winkies and card soldiers on horseback. The fleet of flying monkeys followed them from the smoky sky. As the royals removed their blindfolds and looked around, an escape didn't seem likely. There was no way their carriage stood a chance against the approaching literary soldiers. Luckily, Jack and Goldilocks had friends with a few tricks up their sleeves. The Winkies and card soldiers were gaining speed and moving closer to the carriage. Goldilocks nodded to Jack and he whistled. Suddenly, Sir Grant and Sir Lambton appeared with dozens of their men on horseback. They formed a protective circle around the carriage of royals and knocked the approaching literary soldiers to the ground. "Sir Lambton, is that you?" Cinderella said. "Hello, your majesty," he said. "I wish the circumstances were different, but I'm very pleased to see you're alive." Sir Grant and Sir Lambton's men were not alone. They shared their horses with the lost boys from Neverland. When they were close enough, Toodles, Nibs, and Curly and the lost twins jumped off their horses and landed in the carriage with the royals. The Lost Boys pulled slingshots out of their pockets and launched racks at the Winkies and card soldiers, hitting them in the face and knocking them off their horses. "This is fun," Toodles said. "Let's make it a game," said Curly. 10 points for the big square ones and 5 for the gold guys, Nibs decided. "Deal," the Lost Twins said. The Lost Boys giggled so hard watching the Winkies and cards flop their horses that tears streamed down their rosy faces. They hadn't had this much fun since they left Neverland. Thanks to the Lost Boys and Sir Grant and Sir Lambton's men, the number of literary soldiers trailing the carriage had significantly lowered. But there was still plenty of Winkies and cards left to be concerned about. Luckily, the rescue party was close to the next phase of their plan. As they raced farther into the forest, Goldilocks spotted an arrow sticking out of the tree. It was a sign. "Jack, I see the arrow," she said. "We're almost to the Merry Men." Porridge, Buckle, and Oats were getting tired and starting to slow down, so Jack was relieved to hear it. He whistled toward the treetops as loudly as he could. "Was that the whistle we've been waiting for, or do my ears deceive me?" shouted a boisterous voice from the trees. Jack rolled his eyes and whistled again. "There it is again! Our time has come, merry men! Attack!" Robin Hood and his merry men swung down from the treetops on ropes like monkeys on vines. Little John, Alan a Dale, and Will Scarlet slammed into the Winkies and cards. They knocked them to the ground and stole their horses. Robin Hood flipped through the air and landed in the carriage with the royals. He took off his hat and bowed to the queens. "Have no fear, ladies, for the true hero has arrived," he said. He winked at them flirtatiously and kissed Rapunzel's hand, which Sir William didn't appreciate. "Gosh, I really hate that guy," Jack whispered to Goldilocks. Robin Hood reached for a bow and quiver of arrows fastened to the back of his vest and joined the Lost Boys in shooting Winkies and cards off their horses. After hitting a few, the Prince of Thieves grew cocky and started showing off for the Queen, striking ridiculous poses as he fired. "Don't be intimidated, Lost Boys," he said, and rubbed Toodles' head. "Battle is meant for men." Toodles snapped his slingshot against Robin Hood's buttocks, causing him to squeal like an injured swine. "Toodles, save it for the enemy," Goldilocks replied. "Sorry, it slipped," Toodles said. By now, the Winkies and card soldiers had all been knocked to the ground and had retreated to the northern palace. However, the chase wasn't over yet. Piercing screeches echoed through the forest as flying monkeys descended upon the rescue party. Jack whistled again. "Peter, it's your turn," he yelled. Like a rocket, Peter Pan flew from underneath the carriage where he had been hiding. It happened so fast he startled the royal families. The boy who never grew up handed 2 bags of firecrackers to Little John and Alan a Dale and matches to Will Scarlet. The merry men tossed the firecrackers to Will Scarlet, and once he lit them, Peter quickly scooped them up. The boy flew above the treetops and threw the firecrackers at the approaching flying monkeys. Each explosion shocked and discombobulated the monkeys. They fluttered to the ground. Peter and the merry men continued their firecracker relay until all the flying monkeys had dropped from the sky. "Take that, you overgrown bats," Peter chuckled. Trobella watched Peter Pan in astonishment. Her heart was beating so fast, if it had wings, she would have joined him in flight. "It's like I was beheaded and went to heaven," she said. "He's just like Butterboy, but he floats and sparkles. I didn't know a boy so wonderful could exist." "Stop it, Trobella. Pull yourself together. You promised yourself you wouldn't love again until the world was in better condition." Still, the traveling queen tried to catch the trails of fairy dust that Peter left behind as he flew beside the carriage. I'm going to stop there, and I'll join you guys back again for the second half of the chapter. See you later.